the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Back to the phones now. Let's go to Anna in Miami. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I have a little concern. I'm a teacher, and, we voice a lot of opinions about things. And more than once, a couple of times, people have talked about, they traveled to Italy, and, I got to see this, and I got to see that. And they criticize the Vatican. They say, tickets are so expensive. It's got so much gold. The church is so rich. How can that happen when there's people starving?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. And I feel my insides I get upset because I don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. And it bothers me to hear that.
Understandably so, yeah. So I was just in the Vatican Museum last week. I was there on a pilgrimage, not to the museum, but I went to the museum while I was there. And I saw some priceless artifacts in the Vatican Museum that I'm sure if you were to sell that, you could fetch a lot of money for it. $10,000, $100,000, maybe more than that. So what do we say about why does the church have these things in the big buildings and things like that? So I have a number of things I'd like to share with you. If you have a couple of minutes, I'll be happy to do that.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So the first thing I would say is that when it comes to, let's say, the expensive buildings, the cathedrals, the churches, let's not forget that those things were built many generations ago. So it's not as though this is something that, the church spent $100 million like right now to build. For the most part, those things have been built a long time ago, and they're part of the patrimony of the church, and they're for everybody. They're places where people can go to worship God, and because it's God that we're worshiping, we want to bring our best and to give the best, the most beautiful, if at all possible. Not for God's sake, he doesn't need that, but for our sake, to remind us that, number one, we are giving of our first fruits, as the Bible says. We're giving of our own wealth, our own money, sacrificing that to make beautiful the house of God so people can come to a beautiful place and worship God and be elevated in their minds and spirits by the beauty around them. That's a big part of it. Think about the offering in the book of Genesis, the offering that was given by Cain and by Abel. One of the theological realities here is that Cain's offering was less precious because it was plants. It was the stuff that he had grown out of the earth. Now, Abel's, who was murdered as a result of his brother's jealousy, his offering was more perfect, more acceptable to God because it was more valuable. It involved the life of the animal that was sacrificed. So the life of the animal that was sacrificed has a higher value to it, and that's a biblical glimpse, I would say, of when we seek to honor God, to do things that are more honorable and noble often involve greater cost. I'll leave that there for a moment. The other thing to remember, that whenever anybody brings this up, you should point out that not just right now, but for, let's say, the better part of 2,000 years now, the single most effective global organization that provides care for the poor, free medical care, orphanages, homes for unwed mothers, food, water, assistance, building homes, etc., is by far the Catholic Church. All over the world, Catholic people are busily engaged on a daily 24/7 basis in helping the poor, far outstripping the efforts of governments and any other organization for that matter. And that's a point that should be brought into the conversation. Look at the vast amount of charitable work that the Catholic Church is doing all around the globe for not just Catholics, but for everybody. That has to be taken into account because if it were the case, Anna, I would argue, if it were the case that the Catholic Church was just sort of sitting back and enjoying all these nice buildings and all the things that are in the Vatican Museum and not sharing with anybody, then this argument would have some teeth. But it really doesn't, because it ignores or maybe is not cognizant of the fact that the Catholic Church is doing all these things And I don't say that to blow a horn or anything. It's just a fact that the group that's helping the most poor people, hungry people, homeless people, etc., is the Catholic Church. Third thing, it's very easy for people to say, well, hey, Anna, the Catholic Church, why doesn't it sell off its expensive stuff and feed the poor? Well, two things that I would propose that you answer. Number one is, let's do a thought experiment and imagine that the Catholic Church did that. Let's just say selling St. Peter's. How many billions of dollars could the Catholic Church get from that? I don't know. Let's just say $500 billion. The U.S. government disburses more than that in terms of aid for poverty-stricken nations and things like that on an annual basis, and you still have poor people. Hundreds of billions of dollars are expended, even just by the U.S. government, to combat poverty and hunger. And look, when all that money is spent, you still have homeless people and hungry people. Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. So that is a temporary solution. If the church were to just sell off all these things, which I suppose it could, it shouldn't, but let's say it did. In due time, a year, 5 years, 10 years, all that stuff is gone now. And it's now the private property of Saudi Arabian sheikhs, for example, or the Jeff Bezoses of the world. They might buy that stuff and have it in their possession and nobody else can enjoy it. And after all that money has been spent on programs for the poor, etc., you still have poor people. What then? What do you do then? But there's another aspect to that one, and I'll leave it at this. I'd like to get your reaction. But when somebody asks you a question like this, you can ask them, have you sold your home to feed the poor? Do you have a car? Do you have a house? Do you have furniture? Do you have stuff that you've saved up, your hard-earned money, and you've bought things? How much of that have you sold off to give to the poor? And the answer invariably is going to be none of it. People have a nice home, if they have a nice home. People have stuff. People have cars. They have all sorts of assets that they've saved up for, and they have because they need them and they want them. And they're very quick to spend other people's money and say, you should liquidate your stuff and give it to the poor. Just turn it around and say, how much of your stuff have you liquidated and given it to the poor? And I have found that that's a very powerful, it's not a counter argument per se, but it sheds greater light on the motive that somebody might have for criticizing Catholics because we have some expensive stuff. I'll pause there, Anna. Any thoughts?
No, I'm taking all these notes, and I think it's an interesting twist to make them think a little bit. It is true. I mean, unfortunately, so many things can be done, and we'll still have people in need.
Yeah. Look at the Great Society that was established by President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1960s in his administration. We are still living with this structure of the Great Society programs to help poor people. We have more people now than we did in the 1960s, not just because of the number of people being born, but these structures of poverty and these bureaucracies that have good intentions to try to help people. Who knows how many, maybe into the trillions of dollars we have spent trying to erase poverty, and we still have just as much, if not more now than we did in the 1960s. Isn't that interesting? Incredible.
Now, it's any of those things, that all that gold and all of those beautiful things, I understand, or I've heard that some of that has been donated many centuries ago. Well,
there are, over any given period of time, you will see things like that have been either sold or liquidated. And many popes over the years have done things like that to feed the poor and hungry. So it's not as though it's never been done. But if you were to go through the Vatican Museum, you will find an array of exquisitely beautiful and priceless things that the church, you could say the church owns it, but it doesn't really own it like you own your home or you own your car. The church is a custodian of these artifacts that really belong to humanity. And I would far rather that those things be available for anybody, rich or poor, Catholic, non-Catholic, you can be an atheist, you can go in there and you can see all of these things and enjoy them and benefit from them culturally. Mm-hmm. But if the church were to sell them, they're going to be in some Saudi Arabian sheik's living room, and nobody gets to enjoy them. Exactly. That's part of the trade-off.
That's a very good point. Okay. Well, I appreciate you, explaining it so clearly. Thank you so much.
Anna. Yeah, thank you. And it's good to know that all of those Catholic priests and nuns and lay people are out there, unsung heroes who are out there in the middle of nowhere, in places where you really don't want to go. And I don't mean you, Anna. Thank you for the call, by the way, Anna. Just rhetorically, you don't want to go to these places. You don't want to see the misery and the poverty and the distress that so many people are living in. And you've got folk from Europe and the United States and elsewhere in the country who give up the cushy life that they could otherwise lead, and they go and live in poverty with those people to serve them and to feed them and to care for them in their misery and distress and their illnesses. Think of St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She spent her whole life living in the slums in places like Calcutta and tending to the needs of the most forlorn, outcast, bottom rung of the social ladder people. And isn't it a beautiful thing that so many other women, and men too, in the case of the men's branch of the Missionaries of Charity, and that's just one group, but think of the thousands of women who have entered that religious order over the years, and they give up electricity and running water and the conveniences that you and I take for granted, and they go and live in these places where it's just abject misery, but they do it for the love of Jesus. And I dare say those voices of people who are criticizing the Catholic Church, well, you got all this wealth. Well, what have you done personally? What sacrifices have you made personally? Because it's easy to spend other people's money. It's another thing entirely to put yourself in that situation and give up the good things in this life so you can help God's people who don't have those good things. That has to be part of the discussion too. This entire episode of the Patrick Madrid Show is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay. Download the app today. And thanks for listening.